Welcome to EXP's discussion of CIMA Paper P3 Performance Strategy. Today we're talking about enterprise risk management implementation issues. Now it is useful to remind ourselves that the enterprise risk management before being implemented has been preceded by an enormous amount of effort to, within the context of the business's objectives, to identify and to assess the risks which face the business and to determine an appropriate risk response strategy towards such risks, and to design and put into place a system of risk management controls. So here we'd like to start at the top and emphasize the fact that any successful enterprise risk management implementation relies crucially on the involvement of the various highest levels of the company, the board of directors. They are explicitly tasked with making sure that risk management is properly in place and is robust and reliable within the company. Now, there may be a risk committee existing within the board, may or may not be. It depends on how big the company is and whether they choose to organize such a committee by such name. If it doesn't exist, then certainly the audit committee on the board would have to address itself to internal control and risk management issues. Some companies formalize the risk management role by designating a senior level executive as being a chief risk officer and with direct access into the at the board level. Of course, at the end of the day, risk management processes are only as good as they are actually embraced by the organization and how well they actually perform. So it's very important to make sure that the philosophy of risk management and the practicalities are clearly communicated throughout the organization and embraced by everybody. This means not only clarity in the written communications to staff, but to make sure that staff are trained to be able to operate in a way which is consistent with best enterprise risk management practices. And of course, it's useful to confirm and to verify that the training has been well received and well understood. Of course, for violations, there have to be disciplinary steps involved. One has seen, for example, in recent past, the extent of rogue trading, in other words, unauthorized trading taking place within major banks, leading to significant monetary loss. And of course, the enterprise risk management has to be, the word has to be constantly reinforced at the top, both in terms of word and deed. Again, the tone at the top is really all important to make sure that the most senior levels of management are seen to be behind the importance of standing behind the implementation and importance of respecting enterprise risk management controls. Now let's turn our attention to internal control, or internal controls in general. There's a definition. I leave the viewer to read and consider the definition which is offered here with regard to internal control. The key idea here is that internal control functions should be regarded as a process, not only what to do, but the way in which one does things within a company so as to avoid unnecessary degrees of risk or the possibility of threats to the organization from evolving. In other words, the other key feature is that the internal control function should be sort of naturally built into the company's operations and not simply being seen as an external imposition on the company. Now, the responsibilities of the internal control are several: safeguarding corporate assets, making sure that the corporate accounting data the information is accurate, looking at the company's internal operations from the standpoint of efficiency, and making sure that there is an adherence and respect for accounting financial control policies throughout the organization. So one can see here that the internal control is not intended to be a brake on the business, but is intended to facilitate the business, because the controls have to be in harmony and very much consistent with the objectives of the company. In other words, there has to be some degree of congruence in the design of the controls. Now, as one would imagine, COSO also has something useful to say about internal controls at a company. There are components that address this, which COSO's framework on internal control addresses. One is the control environment, setting the tone at the top. We've encountered this idea before. This has got to do with the philosophy at the top levels. The importance of always be on the lookout of identifying and assessing risks in a dynamic and evolving way. Making sure that the information flow and communications within the company is effective, and also, of course, the control activities, the policies and procedures are being followed within the company. Of course, the process of internal control, the systems themselves have to be monitored as well to make sure that they are doing their job. So it's almost a closing the loop back on the internal control itself. Now, what are the types of controls we might be talking about here? Well, one can see that at the corporate level, we'd be talking about general policy statements which reflect core culture or values of the company with regard to the philosophy of handling risks. This is also connected very much to the notion of corporate governance, which will be discussed later. Controls at the management level with regard to planning, budgeting, and performance monitoring. And then when we get down to the business process controls, this is the decisions that are taken with regard to actual business implementation, authorizing limits for people to be able to approve things and making sure that items are reconciled. And then finally, the transaction controls. These would include checking to make sure that all transactions are properly recorded in an accurate way and that they are complete. Here's a way of perhaps reminding ourselves of the types of controls here. This list here referring to the segregation of duties, which is a well-known concept and a traditional concept of, for example, maker-checker function, or one speaks perhaps of 4 eyes before something is actually processed. Organizational controls, setting limits of authority. So authorizations, these can be physical in nature, supervisory. Even at the level of HR, background checks and checking references is a way of exercising some kind of control or risk management, if you will. There are reconciliations that can be done and certain techniques which may be implemented across the organization. And of course, management controls, as we said, tone at the top. Now, the features of a good system, as one would expect, the essential features, one could think about according to the following list. One could test and describe such a system according to its plan of organization, the custody procedures, the recording practices, authorization procedures, and of course the degree of management supervision which is imposed. The Turnbull report is an important landmark in the topic of internal controls, because it was a commission, a very high-level commission in the UK, that addressed specifically the issues concerning internal controls at the board level, and it defines these as the policies, processes, tasks, behavior, you see that, and other aspects of a company taken together that enables it to be able to respond to a set of risks that it may be faced with. The importance of the Turnbull report is that it's not just talking or limiting itself to the response to risks that a company faces, but it takes into account the fact that the company, in responding to these risks, is mindful that it has objectives that have to be fulfilled. In other words, the idea here with the Turnbull report is an acceptance and understanding that risk is out there that has to be accepted to a degree for the organization to be able to achieve its objectives. If one wanted to reduce risk to zero, one could basically stop operating as a company and achieve that, but then of course the objectives of the company would become compromised. Now of course the Turnbull Committee is making clear that reviewing the effectiveness of internal controls is an essential part of the board's responsibilities. It's the board of directors. So it's really looking to the highest levels of the company to establish the importance and the responsibility of making sure that good internal control systems, robust internal control systems, are implemented within the company. And the link to management is that management is accountable to the board for monitoring the system of internal control, providing assurance to the board that management has done its job.